Most people open the Bible like travelers holding torn pieces of a map in the dark, hoping one verse will explain the ache they cannot name inside themselves. They read Genesis like a beginning they cannot return to, and Revelation like a future they cannot fully imagine, while everything between feels distant and scattered. And then Hebrews appears quietly, almost strangely, like a voice standing between earth and heaven, whispering that the story was never divided at all. Not many people notice this at first, because Hebrews does not behave like a simple letter. It feels more like someone pulling back a curtain you never realized was hanging over your entire life. You think the Bible is mainly about laws, miracles, prophets, suffering, commandments, kings, sacrifice, failure, redemption. But Hebrews says something deeper. It says, all those things were shadows. Not lies, not mistakes, shadows. And suddenly, the entire Bible stops feeling like disconnected history and starts feeling like one heartbeat moving through generations. That changes something inside a person, because most people secretly live fragmented lives. One version of themselves at work, another in relationships, another alone at night, another when fear arrives, another when shame wakes them at 3 in the morning and reminds them of everything they cannot fix. Hebrews speaks directly into that fracture. It says, the human soul has always searched for a bridge between guilt and peace, between flesh and spirit, between effort and rest, between the person you pretend to be and the person you fear you are becoming. And this is why Hebrews matters more than most people realize, because it is not merely explaining theology, it is explaining you. There is a reason the letter constantly compares old things with better things, not to insult the old, but to reveal the hunger hidden beneath it. The priests were not enough. The sacrifices were not enough. The temple was not enough. The law was not enough. Not because they were meaningless, but because they could never fully heal the human heart. That sentence alone can change a life, because many people are still living as if enoughness can be earned. Earned through productivity, earned through discipline, earned through appearance, earned through control, earned through perfection. And the terrifying part is that the harder people try, the emptier they often become. Hebrews understands this exhaustion with frightening accuracy. It describes generations repeating rituals while still carrying fear deep inside themselves. And honestly, that sounds painfully modern. People today have rituals too. Morning routines, self-help systems, success habits, constant optimization, carefully edited identities. And yet, anxiety keeps growing. Loneliness keeps spreading. The soul keeps starving. Hebrews exposes the hidden reason. Human beings were never meant to save themselves through repetition. That is why the book keeps returning to one central image again and again. Rest. Not laziness, not escape. Rest. A deep internal release from the endless pressure to prove your worth. Most people have never experienced that kind of rest. Even when their bodies stop moving, their minds continue running. They replay conversations, regret mistakes, fear rejection, imagine disasters, defend themselves in imaginary arguments, try to control outcomes they cannot control. And underneath all of it lives one terrifying question. Am I enough? Hebrews answers this question in a way that feels almost dangerous. It says, your value was never created by your performance. That is difficult for modern people to accept, because performance has become identity. People introduce themselves through achievement now, through status, through influence, through success, through visibility. But Hebrews dismantles that entire structure slowly and carefully. It reminds the reader that even the greatest figures of Scripture were incomplete. Moses pointed beyond himself. The priests pointed beyond themselves. The sacrifices pointed beyond themselves. The temple pointed beyond itself. Everything was reaching towards something greater. And maybe that is also true of your life. Maybe the restlessness you feel is not failure. Maybe it is longing. Maybe your disappointments are not proof that life is broken beyond repair. Maybe they are signs that temporary things were never designed to carry eternal expectations. That realization changes the way a person suffers, because suffering becomes unbearable when you believe this world should fully satisfy the soul. But Hebrews whispers that every earthly structure eventually cracks. Relationships crack, bodies crack, dreams crack, systems crack, empires crack, even certainty cracks. And yet the letter does not become cynical. That is the surprising part. It does not say nothing matters. It says temporary things were never supposed to become ultimate things. That distinction can rescue a person from despair, because despair often comes from worshipping unstable things. Money disappears, beauty fades, approval shifts, control collapses. People leave. And when identity depends on those things, the soul begins drowning every time life changes direction. Hebrews offers another foundation entirely, not one built on human consistency, but one built on something eternal. This is why the book constantly emphasizes endurance, not shallow positivity, endurance. The kind that survives uncertainty, the kind that survives grief, the kind that survives silence, the kind that survives waiting. Most people can handle pain briefly, few can handle confusion for long. And confusion is where Hebrews becomes deeply personal, because the readers themselves were exhausted. They were tempted to go backward, tempted to abandon faith, tempted to return to what felt familiar and controllable. And honestly, people still do this every day. Not always spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. People return to toxic patterns because uncertainty feels terrifying. They cling to destructive relationships because loneliness feels heavier. They choose numbness over vulnerability, control over trust, performance over surrender. Because surrender feels unsafe. Hebrews understands this fear. That is why it does not merely command people to continue. It explains why continuation matters. Because the story is moving somewhere. That sentence alone can keep a person alive during dark seasons. The story is moving somewhere. Your pain is not random. Your waiting is not meaningless. Your confusion is not invisible. Even the unfinished parts belong to something larger. This is why Hebrews constantly revisits the past, not to trap people there, but to reveal continuity. Abraham trusted without seeing. Moses walked without certainty. The prophets spoke without immediate results. Generation after generation moved forward, carrying promises they never fully held. That sounds tragic at first, until you realize something profound. Faith was never certainty about circumstances. Faith was trust in the character of God, despite circumstances. Modern people often misunderstand faith. They imagine faith means emotional confidence, constant clarity, permanent peace. But Hebrews destroys that illusion. Many heroes inside the letter were afraid. Some wandered, some suffered terribly, some died without seeing fulfillment. And still, the text calls them faithful. That matters deeply, because many people secretly believe their fear disqualifies them from spiritual life. But Hebrews says, faith is not the absence of fear, it is movement despite fear. That changes everything, because suddenly, ordinary struggles become sacred ground. The parent trying to remain gentle while exhausted, the person fighting despair quietly every morning, the individual rebuilding life after betrayal, the lonely soul trying to believe love still exists, the grieving person attempting to keep breathing after loss. Hebrews says heaven notices these moments, not because they look impressive, but because endurance itself carries spiritual weight. The modern world celebrates visible success. Hebrews celebrates invisible perseverance. And honestly, invisible perseverance may be one of the holiest things a human being can offer. There are people who smile publicly while privately carrying unbearable sorrow. People who continue loving after heartbreak. People who continue hoping after disappointment. People who continue praying through silence. Hebrews sees them. That is why the book feels strangely alive centuries later. Because human beings have not changed as much as they imagine. Technology changed. Language changed. Empires changed. But the inner ache remains the same. People still hunger for meaning, still fear death, still crave forgiveness, still search for home, still wonder if they are loved beyond usefulness. Hebrews speaks directly into that hidden wound. And then it does something radical. It says Jesus is not merely another teacher inside the biblical story, he is the thread holding the entire story together. That idea can sound abstract until it becomes personal. Because if the Bible is truly one connected story, then maybe your own fragmented life can also become whole. Maybe the broken seasons were not disconnected accidents. Maybe they were chapters. Maybe the failures taught humility. Maybe the waiting taught dependence. Maybe the loneliness exposed false attachments. Maybe the uncertainty stripped away illusions, and maybe none of it was wasted. Humans desperately want clean narratives, but real transformation rarely looks clean. Hebrews understands this deeply. That is why the letter repeatedly uses the image of refinement. Fire reveals what is real. Pressure reveals what is rooted. Time reveals what can endure. Most people spend years avoiding discomfort, yet discomfort often exposes the idols quietly controlling the heart. You discover what you truly worship when life removes your safety nets. Some worship control, some worship approval, some worship certainty, some worship comfort, some worship being needed. And when those things collapse, identity collapses with them. Hebrews offers freedom from this cycle, not through denial, through reorientation. It redirects attention away from temporary anchors toward eternal ones. That sounds beautiful in theory, but in practice, it feels unsettling. Because humans prefer visible security. We trust what we can touch, measure, predict, control. But Hebrews repeatedly invites people into something deeper than control: trust. And trust is terrifying because it requires release. Release of outcomes, release of ego, release of self-made identity, release of the illusion that constant effort can save the soul. That is why many people resist the message of Hebrews without realizing it. Because grace sounds comforting until it threatens your coping mechanisms. If worth cannot be earned, then performance loses its throne. If love is given, then manipulation loses power. If identity comes from something eternal, then public approval becomes less important. That kind of freedom changes relationships too. People who no longer need constant validation stop treating others like emotional oxygen. They stop controlling. Stop pretending. Stop performing endlessly. They become capable of genuine presence. And presence is rarer than people think. Most conversations are negotiations for approval. Most social behavior is subtle survival. Most conflict grows from hidden fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of insignificance. Fear of abandonment. Hebrews addresses these fears indirectly by addressing the deepest one beneath them all. The fear that separation cannot be healed. That the distance between humanity and God is permanent. That guilt is final. That shame is stronger than mercy. And this is where the book becomes emotionally explosive. Because Hebrews insists that reconciliation is already being offered. Not after perfection, not after self-improvement, not after finally becoming worthy. Now, that idea offends pride, but it heals exhausted people. There are individuals listening right now who have spent years trying to become acceptable. Acceptable to family, acceptable to society, acceptable to themselves, acceptable to God. And no matter how hard they try, peace remains distant. Hebrews explains why. Peace was never meant to grow from self-salvation. It grows from surrender. That does not mean passivity. It means trust deeper than fear. And honestly, many people have never learned trust. They learned achievement, adaptation, masking, hypervigilance, emotional survival. But not trust, because trust requires safety, and many hearts no longer feel safe anywhere. This is why the imagery of Jesus as high priest matters so much in Hebrews. Not because of religious complexity, because of emotional reality. The text presents someone who understands weakness from inside human experience itself. Someone who does not stand distant from suffering, but enters it. That changes the emotional atmosphere of the entire Bible. Suddenly, Scripture stops feeling like a cold list of divine demands. It becomes a story of pursuit, a story of rescue, a story of restoration. And maybe that is what many people secretly need more than advice. Not another strategy, not another productivity system, not another motivational speech, but the possibility that they are still pursued by grace even in failure. If this guide has helped you, write 1 in the comments, and if not, write 0. This way, I'll know which tips are most useful for your garden. Strange how people often hide most when they most need connection. Hebrews understands this too. That is why the letter warns against isolation. Not merely physical isolation, spiritual isolation, emotional isolation. The kind where a person slowly stops believing they matter. The kind where shame becomes identity. The kind where pain becomes personality. Many people live there quietly, smiling outwardly while internally disconnected from hope. And over time, the soul grows tired. Not ordinary tiredness, existential tiredness, the kind where mornings feel heavy before they even begin. Hebrews speaks directly into that exhaustion by repeating one astonishing idea. You are not carrying life alone. That sentence sounds simple, but truly believing it can transform a person psychologically. Because isolation distorts perception. Pain becomes absolute. Fear becomes prophecy. Temporary emotions become permanent conclusions. And people begin building identities around wombs. Hebrews interrupts that process. It constantly points beyond the isolated self toward a larger story, a larger kingdom, a larger hope, a larger identity. Modern culture teaches people to construct themselves endlessly. Invent yourself. Define yourself. Rebrand yourself. Perfect yourself. But Hebrews offers another vision entirely. Receive yourself. Not as an accident, not as a performance, but as someone invited into belonging. That changes the relationship with failure too, because when identity depends entirely on success, mistakes become existential threats. But when identity rests in something deeper, failure becomes a teacher instead of a destroyer. Hebrews repeatedly emphasizes confidence. Not arrogance, confidence. A grounded inner assurance that survives instability. And people desperately need that today. Because modern life constantly destabilizes identity. News cycles, economic uncertainty, social comparison. Digital performance. Endless visibility. People are observed constantly now, measured constantly, compared constantly. No wonder anxiety feels endless. The soul was never designed for permanent comparison. Hebrews redirects attention away from comparison and toward communion, toward connection with God, beyond performance metrics. That sounds abstract until life falls apart. Then suddenly, deeper questions emerge. Who am I when success disappears? Who am I when beauty fades? Who am I when nobody applauds? Who am I when plans collapse? Hebrews answers with remarkable tenderness. You are still seen, still known, still invited, still loved. Not because of flawless behavior, but because grace reaches deeper than failure. That message feels almost impossible for many people to believe, because shame trains the mind to expect rejection. People begin interpreting life through hidden condemnation. Every criticism confirms unworthiness. Every mistake becomes evidence. Every disappointment feels personal. Hebrews dismantles this inner courtroom slowly. It says, condemnation no longer has final authority. Mercy does. And mercy changes people differently than fear ever could. Fear can force temporary compliance, but mercy transforms the heart itself. This is why Hebrews keeps contrasting old systems with living relationship. External rules alone cannot create internal peace. Humans need transformation deeper than behavior management. And honestly, many people know this already from experience. They changed habits, but remained anxious. Changed careers, but remained empty. Changed cities, but remained restless. Because external movement cannot heal internal fracture by itself. Hebrews addresses the fracture underneath behavior, the fracture between humanity and God, between soul and truth, between longing and fulfillment. And perhaps that is why the book feels so emotionally intense. It speaks to the deepest hunger beneath all other hungers. The hunger to come home. Not merely physically, spiritually, emotionally, existentially. Most people spend years searching for substitutes. Achievement becomes home. Romance becomes home. Addiction becomes home. Approval becomes home. Distraction becomes home. But temporary shelters eventually collapse under eternal longing. Hebrews invites the soul somewhere more permanent, into rest, into trust, into reconciliation.
And notice how often the letter
Returns to the word better, a better covenant, a better hope, a better promise. Not because earthly life has no beauty, but because human beings were designed for more than survival. That explains a painful reality many people feel but rarely express. Even after achieving goals, emptiness sometimes remains.
the promotion arrives.
The relationship arrives. The success arrives. Yet something still whispers, "This cannot be all."
Hebrews says,
That whisper is not weakness. It is spiritual memory. A reminder that finite things cannot satisfy infinite longing. This realization changes ambition itself. Ambition stops becoming desperate self-construction. It becomes stewardship, contribution, purpose, expression, not identity. That distinction protects the soul. Because when ambition becomes identity, burnout becomes inevitable. People begin sacrificing peace for validation, relationships for status, health for recognition, presence for productivity. And eventually, they lose themselves while trying to prove themselves. Hebrews calls people back from that edge, back toward centeredness, back toward trust, back toward eternal perspective. This does not remove pain from life, but it changes the meaning of pain. Suffering without meaning crushes people. But suffering connected to transformation becomes survivable. That is why Hebrews repeatedly speaks about discipline not as punishment, but as formation. Modern people often interpret difficulty as abandonment, but Hebrews presents another possibility. Some struggles are shaping processes, not evidence of rejection. That perspective can save someone during dark seasons, because despair often grows from misinterpretation. A closed door becomes proof of worthlessness. A delay becomes proof of abandonment. A failure becomes proof of permanent inadequacy. Hebrews gently challenges those conclusions. It reminds the reader that unfinished does not mean forsaken. And honestly, many lives are still unfinished stories. People think they are too broken, too late, too damaged, too inconsistent, too afraid. But Hebrews is filled with imperfect people still moving toward God. That matters deeply, because perfectionism keeps many souls trapped. They delay healing until they feel worthy of healing. Delay love until they feel worthy of love. Delay faith until they feel certain enough. But certainty was never the requirement. Movement was. Trust was. Openness was. This is why Hebrews celebrates faith not as intellectual superiority, but relational surrender. The heroes of faith were not fearless machines. They were human beings carrying uncertainty while still walking forward. And maybe that is the invitation hidden inside the entire Bible. Not to become invulnerable, but to remain open despite vulnerability. That changes relationships too. People who stop worshipping self-protection become capable of genuine intimacy. They stop needing domination, stop needing constant control, stop treating vulnerability like weakness. Because they no longer believe their survival depends entirely on their own strength. Hebrews repeatedly reminds readers that weakness itself can become sacred ground. That idea opposes almost everything modern culture teaches. The world rewards image, speed, certainty, power. But Hebrews speaks about endurance, humility, surrender, patience, faith. Qualities many people secretly hunger for, even while publicly chasing other things. And eventually, exhaustion exposes the difference. People reach moments where performance no longer satisfies, moments where distraction stops working, moments where success cannot silence emptiness. And in those moments, Hebrews becomes intensely relevant. Because the letter was written to tired people, people tempted to quit, people tempted to numb themselves by returning to smaller visions of life. The author does not shame them for exhaustion. He simply keeps pointing them towards something greater than exhaustion. Hope. Not shallow optimism, deep hope. The kind rooted beyond circumstances, the kind that survives unanswered questions, the kind that survives grief, the kind that survives silence. Silence especially terrifies modern people because silence removes distractions, and distractions often protect people from confronting themselves. But Hebrews repeatedly invites inward honesty, not self-hatred, honesty. Honesty about fear, about longing, about weakness, about dependence. And strangely, this honesty becomes liberating rather than crushing, because pretending is exhausting. Many people spend years maintaining identities that no longer fit their souls, strong when they are hurting, fine when they are unraveling, certain when they are confused, independent when they are desperate for connection. Hebrews breaks that illusion gently. It says human beings were never designed for isolated self-sufficiency. That is why community matters throughout the letter. Not superficial socializing, deep mutual encouragement. People reminding one another not to lose heart. And honestly, the world desperately needs that now. Because loneliness has become normalized. People communicate constantly while feeling unseen internally. They consume endless content while starving for meaning. They know thousands of opinions, but cannot hear their own souls anymore. Hebrews cuts through the noise with startling clarity. Fix your eyes on what is eternal. Not because earthly life is worthless, but because earthly life becomes distorted when disconnected from eternity. That sentence changes daily existence. Suddenly, small moments matter differently. Kindness matters, presence matters, integrity matters, patience matters. Not because they earn salvation, but because they reveal alignment with deeper truth. Hebrews consistently shifts focus from external appearance toward internal reality. And internal reality eventually shapes everything else. A fearful heart creates fearful behavior. A resentful heart creates resentful relationships. An insecure heart creates endless striving. But a grounded heart creates peace around itself. Not perfect peace, real peace. The kind that remains steady even while life shakes. And perhaps that is the greatest hidden gift inside Hebrews. It does not promise escape from struggle. It offers anchoring within struggle. That difference matters enormously, because many people wait to feel peace only after circumstances improve. But circumstances are always changing, always uncertain, always fragile. Hebrews offers a peace not dependent on temporary stability. A peace rooted beyond visible reality itself. That sounds mystical until life becomes painful enough to require it. Then suddenly, deeper foundations matter more than surface comfort. People discover whether their identity can survive loss, whether hope can survive delay, whether faith can survive silence. Hebrews insists that it can, not through human strength alone, but through divine faithfulness. And this returns us to the central mystery of the entire book. Everything points toward fulfillment. The sacrifices pointed forward. The temple pointed forward. The law pointed forward. The prophets pointed forward. History itself pointed forward. And Hebrews says, fulfillment arrived not merely as information, but as relationship. That changes how a person reads the Bible forever. Suddenly, Scripture stops feeling fragmented. The garden, the flood, the Exodus, the wilderness, the kings, the exile, the prophets, the cross. All connected, all moving toward reconciliation. And maybe your own life works the same way. Moments that once looked disconnected may eventually reveal hidden continuity. The heartbreak that deepened compassion. The loneliness that awakened prayer. The uncertainty that shattered pride. The failure that redirected purpose. Humans often judge stories too early. Hebrews invites patience with unfinished narratives. That includes your own. You may not yet understand the meaning of your current season, but meaning sometimes emerges slowly, quietly, through endurance, through reflection, through surrender. And surrender is not defeat. Hebrews presents surrender as alignment with reality itself, the reality that humans are not ultimate, not self-created, not self-sustaining, not abandoned either. That last part matters profoundly, because many people secretly live as if they are abandoned. Abandoned emotionally, spiritually, existentially. They carry invisible grief everywhere. The grief of feeling unseen, unwanted, unforgiven, unknown. Hebrews speaks directly into that darkness. It says, access to God is open, not through perfection, through grace. And grace is difficult to receive for people addicted to earning. But eventually, exhaustion softens resistance. People grow tired of carrying impossible weights, tired of proving, tired of pretending, tired of hiding, and perhaps that exhaustion itself becomes the doorway. Because Hebrews repeatedly shows that emptiness can prepare the soul for truth. Not comfortable emptiness, necessary emptiness. The kind that strips illusions away. The kind that reveals what cannot truly save. That process feels painful while happening. But afterward, many people realize something surprising. The collapse of false foundations was mercy. Because false foundations eventually fail anyway. Better to awaken before the entire structure collapses completely. Hebrews is ultimately a book about awakening. Awakening from ritual without relationship. Awakening from striving without peace. Awakening from religion without transformation. Awakening from fear without trust. And once you see this, the entire Bible changes shape. It becomes one enormous story about God moving toward humanity again and again, despite resistance. A story about covenant stronger than failure. Mercy stronger than shame. Love stronger than death. That is why Hebrews feels simultaneously ancient and deeply modern. Because human beings still need the same truths, still need rest, still need forgiveness, still need meaning, still need hope, still need home. And maybe the deepest reason Hebrews connects the entire Bible together is because it connects the entire human experience together too. The fear in Eden, the wandering in Exodus, the grief in the Psalms, the longing in the prophets, the sacrifice in the Gospels, the endurance in the letters. All of it still exists inside modern hearts. The Bible is not merely describing ancient people. It is describing us, our wandering, our hunger, our fear.
our longing to return.
And Hebrews stands like a bridge over the entire story, saying the return is possible, not because humanity finally became worthy, but because grace moved first.
That realization
Can soften even hardened hearts, because beneath anger there is often pain, beneath pride there is often fear, beneath control there is often insecurity. Hebrews reaches beneath the surface and addresses the soul itself. And perhaps that is why people continue returning to it generation after generation. Not for intellectual stimulation alone, but for reassurance,
for grounding.
for hope during uncertainty, for the reminder that life is larger than visible circumstances, larger than temporary suffering,
Larger than fear.
In the end, Hebrews does not merely explain the Bible, it explains the hidden ache beneath human existence. The ache for reconciliation, the ache for permanence, the ache for rest. And it dares to claim those aches are not accidents, they are invitations. Invitations to stop building identity on unstable ground. Invitations to stop treating performance like salvation. Invitations to trust that grace reaches deeper than shame. Most people spend their lives trying to hold themselves together. Hebrews whispers that perhaps the deeper miracle is discovering you are already being held. And once a person truly believes that, even for a moment, the entire world begins to look different.